Okay, well, hello folks. My name is Samuel Siegel. I am Executive Director of the American War of Independence Privateer Museum. And today I'm giving a presentation on privateering during the American Revolution, or also known as the Revolutionary War. Now, it's important to know what a privateer is. Most people are like, well, they're pirates. Yes and no. Please hold all questions till the end, and then I'll get to you. Okay? Thank you. So, a privateer is actually what they would call a vessel for the purpose of privateering. Privateering itself is the act of committing acts of piracy on behalf of a government in all legal speak. So basically, legal pirates. Now, every privateer is indeed a pirate, but not every pirate is a privateer. Because, as I've told some of my colleagues before, privateersmen are like purebred dogs. We come with papers noting our pedigree. So each one of us would have a letter of marque and such, but I'll get into how that all started. If you go back to October 1775, in Rhode Island they came up with this great idea. They knew two British ships were coming from England to our colonies here in the Americas, and they knew that they were carrying troops. So Congress was really worried about this because the king had already shown how upset he was at us by levying taxes every single year for over 10 years. And then there was one instance to another where just bad things that the king kept doing. And then finally Lexington Concord, we had had enough, and that's what started off the war. So come October of that year, we were like, well, they're sending more troops, please come in and sit down. There's something we have to do about that. So why don't we get a couple of our own ships and go out there to meet them and hopefully persuade them to turn around. Now that was the wild plan. Nobody had ever suggested that before. Because why would you want to go up against the world's most powerful navy? That's just insane. Especially a ragtag group of people who basically are fishermen and merchant mariners. So October 13th, Congress actually approved the plan for the Navy. They first started with 2 ships. By the end of that month, they kind of went, well, maybe 2 ships isn't going to be enough. I think we might need more, because the troops started landing right about then. October 30th, that's when Congress had 2 more. November 10th was when the Colonial Marines established, which later became the United States Marine Corps. 15 days after the Continental Navy was established, that's when the U.S. Navy actually started, or the Continental Navy. November 27th, there was a congressman, or a representative from Rhode Island by the name of Silas Dean. His brother basically wrote him a letter saying, hey, I know these guys, they're merchant sailors. When can we get into the fight and start making some money while helping out the cause of liberty? So Silas actually brought it to Congress. They talked about it for 4 months. But about a month later, actually a few days later, some of the colonies were like, no, we're going to do this on our own. You guys do what you do best and talk. So that's what they did. They talked about it until March. March 23rd, Congress actually authorized privateering as a suitable effort for the cause of liberty. So what did that mean? That meant that Congress was starting to say, yes, we're going to accept applications for privateering. So at that point, the first thing that they had to do is they had to get that in the newspaper. So they fired off the proclamation on the 27th of March. So about 5 days after they said, yes, we're doing this, they put that in the Pennsylvania Gazette, which had thousands of readers at that time. Not to mention, it would also go out to other colonies, and other colonies would pick it up, and and other cities would pick it up, and then word of mouth and so forth. So on April 11th, the 2 privateer schooners, the very first ones out of Philadelphia, were the schooners Chance and Congress, and they became the first to receive letters of marque in Philadelphia. Now, the schooner Chance itself, I've seen it described as a schooner, and I've seen it described as a sloop. But I've also seen what that vessel was at that time based on records from Independent Seaport Museum. So it was indeed a schooner, but it was a small one, so they said sloop. There was a lot of different names for a lot of different things back in that time, so going through the historic records, sometimes it makes it difficult to interpret. But the first person that was on that one, that was actually one of the backers, was John Adams. The second one that was one of the backers was John Hancock. He was president of Congress at the time. Now, we did so well that a year later the British got involved. We had harassed their shipping so great and so much within a year that the Brits were like, no, we have to do this. We have to make sure that we can attack as well. So off they went. In early January, that was when the bill was introduced to the House of Commons. February 7th, they finally passed it, sent it to the House of Lords. From there, in March, it went to the newspaper to advertise, yes, we are now accepting applications. But it was limited to only Englishmen. They didn't want loyalists actually getting their letter of marque because they had no idea whether somebody was going to get one and work both sides. There were a couple that did that, but I'm pretty sure it did not end as they had hoped. By 1778, at the end there, January 10th, the beginning of it, Parliament actually gave permission to the West Indies to start allowing loyalist privateers the chance to get a letter of marque. The catch was they had to go down to the West Indies to get it, because they weren't letting it happen up in New York. There were enough problems up here, they felt that was going to be the easiest way. So, what it cost to get a letter of marque and instruction here. You can see up there, the average letter of a bond was 2,800 pounds. In today's money, that's over $97,000. Yeah, that's a lot of inflation. That's almost 400% inflation. And those numbers are current. I double-checked it 2 days ago. Because I had been telling people, oh, it's about $22,000, which, that would make sense, No, our money has devalued that much that that's how much it would cost in today's money to get one. So it was truly a game for the rich. I mean, you had to have money in order to own a ship or be the captain on one. And of course, as we all know, boat is bust out another 1,000. Both of those documents were required. One's it's like your license and your registration, or your license and your insurance. So the insurance policy being the rules of engagement and the letter of instruction. There were certain things that we had to follow. Among them was 1/3 at the least of our company had to be landmen, because we were in direct competition with the Navy at that time. So how people got into privateering. Now this is the interesting thing that you guys, I think, will like. So the first way is, of course, you've got the newspapers. Then you've got the tavern flyers. Now, you could go into any tavern, and a captain may or may not be there, but for the most part, if you lived on a coastal area, there would be captains or representatives of privateers in there ready to sign you up. The same way that there would be people ready to sign you up into service for the Continental Army. The difference is we pay better, hands down, which is also another reason why the Navy put limits on us as far as what we could or could not do. They wanted to make sure that we behaved in a manner that was civilized and gentlemanly. as well as give them a chance and opportunity to do things that they needed to do. Thus the whole only having landmen. So that, of course, also meant press gangs. We could see you at a tavern, even pay for your drinks. How nice. Privateer buying me drinks. Boy, am I going to get drunk on their tap. Silly goofs, right? Because as soon as you pass out, that's it. You get clubbed over the head. You wake up on board my vessel, and next thing you know, you're going, what did I do to myself? Why am I on a boat? And then I would force you to sign the Articles of Agreement so you could get paid. Granted, if you didn't sign that, that's fine. That just meant you got no benefits, you got no pay, and you know, then you're pretty much, we can do whatever you want. At that point, you're a stowaway. So it's a long swim back to shore on some of those things. So the Article of Agreement, that is basically a contract between the owners and captain, or in case myself, and the rest of the crew. That basically determined what you got paid. It also determined your benefits in case of dismemberment or death. If you had family, the money should go back to your family. Those that were unscrupulous, of course, they didn't always send it all. If you had none, it actually suggests what to do. So every little thing. So that's your insurance policy and your employment contract with the captain for that particular company. Now the daily life of a privateer was not an easy one. It was a lot easier as far as the Army, you could at least try to get away. There were lots of deserters from the Army. If you know what happened if you were trying to desert on a privateer? Well, they would.
I know.
They absolutely would. They would let you off at the next port the next time they're in port. Till then, if you wanted off, it's a long swim back to shore. I guarantee you're probably not going to make it. Not in some of those waters. Because if you can't take anything with you if you're swimming. So a lot of guys were stuck. And then they would, once they started raking in the prize money, you know what, this maybe not be so bad. So they would also have to do things like they'd have to abide by the watch. And the watch, we didn't bring it with us in our display this time. We usually have a ship's bell and a hourglass. Every 30 minutes we ring the bell. So say it's noon, that would be, I want to say 4 bells actually at noon. So your first bell would be at the top of the hour, which would be noon. You would hear the 8 bells for the ending of a shift. A watch runs 4 hours, and then it repeats. So you'd actually have guys working 2 watches, sometimes 3, depending on the vessel. So at the top of the hour, you've got the 4 bells, or the 8 bells really, and then it starts over. So at 12:30, that would be 1 bell. At 1 o'clock, it would be 2. At 2 o'clock, it would be 3 bells, and so on, until you get to 8, and then the cycle starts over. It gets really, really confusing, but it's something you get used to hearing on the ship. Different things that they would have to deal with are all the ropes and the lines. There's 2 kinds of lines on any sailing vessel. Do you know what they are, sir?
No. Halyards?
No, I'm talking general. Real general, basic. You got running and you got standing. So, what's your running rigging do? Your running rigging moves. That's what runs. Your standing rigging stands still. Now there's certain ropes on there that hold the mast in place. I can't remember what the hell they're called. But they hold it from going side to side. They've actually got one that goes from the aft of the ship all the way up and over and around into the front, into the bow, just at the water line. That's standing rigging. That's there for stability, for holding things. Running rigging are things like halyards and different items that you would use raise or lower a sail. Navigation wasn't what it was, what we're used to. You know, now we got GPS and everything. Back then, they actually used a chart, an object called an octant, which most are like, well, what's a sextant? Well, a sextant is a later period, and the sextant is 6. And 6 is actually more accurate than 8, which is where you get octant. So the octant is a lot bigger, but they would circumvent the globe with all that. In fact, that up there is an octant at the top of the display there under navigation. Then you'd have how they made their money. If they weren't chasing privateers, they were shipping cargo. Because why not double dip? That's going to bring more profit. That's going to be how we're able to actually fund our privateering venture. And of course, they would also provide support for the Continental Navy as well as Army. It was not uncommon for militias to be assigned to privateers. Back here in Bucks County, we had 2 different kinds of militia. We had the Loyalist Marines, and then we had the Rebel Marines, or the Bucks County Marines. Both were from Bucks County. Everything was divided. So of course the Loyalist Marines would be on Loyalist vessels, and the Bucks County Marines would be on the Rebel ones. Recreation. Didn't always happen, but when it could, we would definitely partake in it. We had things like cards, there were games, some people chose singing. Sea shanties were not a thing at this time. A shanty was actually a work song. So if you ever heard a work song, it's literally just everybody being able to keep in time. That was all that was for. But they didn't bust down to the song like Pirates of Penzance or anything like that. It wasn't done. But they would find ways to occupy their time, whether it be scrimshaw, which of course that's carving into horn to intricate designs, and that can be found everywhere. Macrame, which is kind of a sewing, it's like crochet but with knots. Is how I've had it described. They would mend clothes. They would gamble, even though gambling was frowned upon by every single captain. We knew it would happen. You get a bunch of lonely bored guys around, so of course they're going to gamble. The only stipulation is on my vessel, I tell the guys, don't do it for money. You want to do that for money against other crews, that's fine. With your own, don't do it for money. It could be done for food. It could be done for, say you needed to trade something, you know, you could do it that way, and you would be able to get services done. Somebody was better sewing than you were, and you had a hand or something, and they didn't. Well, fine, you know, you can put up your skill in the pot, in the kitty. Food was very, very important. Everybody's like, well, how? Food at sea must be horrible. You hear songs every now talking about moldy bread. Those are naval vessels, not privateers. Privateers were fed well, and we had to be fed well because we wanted a very good functional crew. The only way to get a good functional crew is to have them happy. How do you keep a crew happy? You feed them. So if you've got a contented belly, you're going to be able to do more and think more, and you're going to be happy, especially if it's quality food. In fact, that was one of the things that I learned, was that a lot of the foods that they would bring, they would actually share. It would be communal. So everybody was responsible for meals, just different stages. Some ships had a full kitchen, some did not. Some they were day sailors. They would come back to camp, and then they would do that at the camp. Now the fun part. this is the horrible side of the business. The risks were just not just your everyday, hey, I'm going into the ocean. What kind of tempest or gale will befall us? You know, somebody could slip and fall and either drown by falling off of a yardarm, or they would slam into the deck and break a limb while they were out at sea. That would be horrible. That's a general risk. But we also had to contend with other vessels. Going up on a privateer, if we were taking up arms against a British, we would never go against British Navy, number one. We would always be outgunned. Anybody who says, hey, I think I'm going to go after that one, and points off at a man of war, and you know they've got a 6-gun sloop, they're going to die a horrible death, because they're not going to take prisoners. So we would go after merchants and other merchants, and we would try to be as even as we possibly could as far as the battles. Along with that, when you're coming up on a prize ship, you have to figure out whether or not they're going to fight. And you can tell by looking at them from afar. You can see the action on the deck, and as a captain you kind of know what you're looking at and whether or not they're going to fight. Now, the best thing they can do if they are insured is surrender, and that happened a lot. Most times they would just surrender, be like, yep, we surrender, we're not going to put up a fight, because the ship is insured, the crew is insured, everybody's still going to get paid. If they did fight, then you have to expend resources. So that's gunpowder, potential loss of life of your own crew. And if you lose more of your own crew, you don't have enough to sail the vessel, and they're not going to give up their men.
If they give up, do you get their ship then?
Yeah, you absolutely did. If they give up, you get the ship, the whole kit and caboodle. If it was a ship they needed, they would take it. If it was, say it was basically junk, you know, we might sink it for them, put them out of their misery, but that'd just be as simple as drilling holes in the bottom of the ship at that point. Most times we would take part of our crew, put it on theirs, and we'd sail it in with them. Or they would be like, nope, fine, you know, and we have a couple of guys go over, and their crew would sail it into port. So it was rather interesting how a lot of that was done. But you never knew what you were going to get. You had some idea going up on them, but you never really knew what you were going to get when you came up against another vessel. Are they going to fight, or are they going to flee? You know, and then there's the chance, if they flee, can we catch them? Do we have the resources available to give chase? Because the first thing that enemy ship is going to do, pull into port and tell the Brits, hey, there's pirates in these waters. The physical consequences of the life of a privateersman were not good. You had to worry about scurvy. If you liked your nights out on the town and you liked ladies, there were very, very common social diseases of the time. And that's putting it very as politely as I possibly can. They didn't know about germs. They knew about certain diseases, and like pox, syphilis, and gonorrhea. All the important STIs they knew about, for the most part, that were available at that time. The biggest concerns were actually the STIs and the scurvy and the malnutrition. Granted, if you're not eating well on board a ship, that's not entirely the ship's fault, but it could be a lifestyle choice. There could be something, you could be sick and not know it. So, amputations happen quite a bit, and you may or may not have a doctor on board. You may have a barber to help shave and stuff, but you may not have an actual surgeon. But, so that barber's gonna have to do the job of that surgeon. Or, in my crew's case, when my doctor is unavailable, it's me. Now, I am definitely trained into removing a limb. It is not pleasant. They did not have anesthesia at that time that we know of. Not like today. They had things that were called bits. I have examples of this in our case. And that was basically a stick wrapped in leather that they'd shove in your mouth. It's called chomping on the bit. That's where that saying came from. You also had a bullet you can put in between your teeth, and that's where bite the bullet came from.
How did rope burns happen?
Rope burns, that's an excellent question. That happened anytime you had to go in the rigging. So, most people are like, oh, well, sailors went barefoot. It was dumb to go on board deck barefoot. You sail, I take it? I heard him talking. So yeah, you know. Today it's a lot different than back then. Back then, most of the decks were made out of teak or an oak. Well, you can still get splinters. So you really don't want to go anywhere without, like, at the very least, rope sandals, which were fashioned. But rope burns, somebody was like, well, they lost a sandal, there they are, and then they slip. Yeah, rope burn on the bottom of your foot. That's going to be a good time. Also, you could slip and fall and catch the rope. That's going to burn. Say you're grabbing the anchor and it gets too heavy, or you're on the wrong end of the snap, and that's it. Rope burns. Because gloves were not commonplace then. They had them. Not every ship had them. I mean, gloves were invented, but they were not commonplace. I mean, when I was a younger guy, even as a mechanic, I just would rather use these than put a glove. It's all I'm feeling. Bladed weapons, swords, knives, that kind of thing. That's going to give you a cut or a puncture. Anything that would definitely ruin your day could happen. Everybody sees the syringe at the bottom of the screen. I had mentioned earlier about syphilis. Well, gonorrhea was another one. That is called a mercury syringe. They would use mercury to treat the symptoms of that disease. And I will let your imaginations go with where that was supposed to go.
Did it work?
No. I mean, it's mercury, so it's going to burn, and you're not going to feel anything after that. But they didn't even know it was toxic at the time. So did it relieve the symptoms? Temporarily, but it's like breaking your pinky to distract you from your toe hurting. So, privateers versus Continental Navy ships. You can see there was a huge factor, great big difference there. Almost 1,700 privateers during the course of the war had letters of marque, versus the Continental Navy's 64 ships. So that's over 1,200 guns from the Continental Navy to over 14,000 guns. Almost 15,000 guns that privateers had. And they were putting cannons on everything. The gunboat Philadelphia was a 20 to 25 foot rowboat. They had a 12-pounder up front, 2 6s off the side, and a swivel in the back. Now the thing sank, but they were putting guns on everything. I still don't know to this day how they loaded that thing. I really have no idea. But there's pictures of it in the Museum of the American Revolution. I think they have a mock-up of it down there. It was just insanity. I mean, the competition for sailors alone was just insane. There was actual pressing from the Continental Navy against privateers going on as well. How many of you are familiar with Marcus Hook? Okay. Every year they have a pirate festival that happens down in Marcus Hook. We actually go there because it has a tie to privateering. There's chairs over here
great.
as well.
Thank you.
Now, why Marcus Hook is so important is privateer ships would actually come up the Delaware Bay, and as Continental Navy ships were coming down, they would actually dock with these ships, the privateer ships, steal all but a third of their crew, and then go press their sailors and go on their merry way. This is reported to have happened one summer, I think it was 1781. We had 3 ships that were off the coast of New Jersey, and they just went on a hunting spree against British merchants, and prize after prize after prize. They were pulling them in to all the courts of admiralty along the coast there. And names escape me right now. But the Jersey coast is littered with areas where they had 3 main courts of admiralty where privateers could go in and sell their goods. But they needed to resupply. So in order to do that, they had to go to a bigger port. So they would come through the bay, up to Delaware, and right before they got to Philadelphia, about where Mud Island is, which is we now know as the airport, and Fort Mifflin, they were approached, they were boarded, and they took all but a skeleton crew. Off they went, the ships came back to Philadelphia. One was like, that's it, I'm done. The other 2, the owners of them, appealed to Congress saying, hey, can we get our men back? Congress wrote them, said, if you can find them, you can have them. They did actually find them, and they did actually get their men back. But that's also, again, item 8 on the letter of instruction, 1/3 at the least of your company shall be landmen. Now here's the clincher of that. In 3 months' time, you can take anybody who is unfamiliar with sailing and turn them into a working sailor. They may not be very good at it, but it's an experienced hand after 3 months. They're still considered a greenhorn, but you're able to do your job at the very least. So, because of all that, why would you want to become a privateer? Well, first and foremost, it's about the money. Like, in 3 months' time, one cruise, you could make a year's wage, if not double it, in 3 months' time. So it was very lucrative. It was the largest industry during the Revolutionary War. It was the most lucrative. I mean, we got all sorts of supplies for the Continental Army, as well as enough stuff for us to sell or keep ourselves. Some decided that they saw it as a way to aid in the cause of liberty. They wanted to help. What better way to do it? And, you know, plus you're making coin. And then, ultimately, some really didn't have a choice. Some people were either pressed or sold into it. A woman that was unhappy with her husband, and this has been recorded a couple of times, if a woman was unhappy with her husband or her child, could sell either the child or the husband to privateers, saying, here, take them. I can't do a thing with them. And we would take them and put them to work. So, now, also, if there was a gentleman that had a lady caller and noticed that she had eyes for somebody else, ultimately, he could actually go and the privateers going, hey, here's 5 shillings, go take this guy. He'll work great for you. And honestly, we would pay, you know, hey, you're giving us money, we'll go take the guy. More personnel in our pocket. You know, granted, if they did not do any good, or we're gonna make them walk the plank.
You actually did.
Not actually walking the plank. Walking the plank, that's the fun thing. Nobody actually walked a plank. They didn't stick a board off the side of a ship and make them walk onto it. No, that wasn't done. The gangplank, we would fire them. That's what that meant. Take a long walk off of a short pier, which means not just go dump yourself in the ocean like what we think it means now. No, it meant you were fired. All these little things that with speech between then and now, it's all fascinating to me. And I could actually go on a different lecture.
So what do you mean you were fired?
You were fired. You
Now
could
canon?
get fired. No,
No.
no,
Done.
no. You were done. That was it. They didn't.
You're laid off.
They chose to part ways. You are no longer employed in this
So
venture.
you weren't killed?
Right. No.
Oh, okay.
No. 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 We're privateers. We're not pirates. And even then, maybe. No. No. There were certain things that we had to do. It's also the letters of instruction were also about do's and don'ts. And we had to be gentlemanly to even the most crew. So, are there any questions? Yes, sir.
It was $2,800 at the time.
Yeah.
To apply for a letter of marque.
That was the
Right.
bond, yes, sir.
Why would Congress restrict their ability to have privateers out there? Why would they charge so much? They could be losing out on people who could be working for them.
Well, here's the thing. If, say you're the Continental government, what's the one thing you need in order to secure,
Money.
yes, yeah, in order to secure troops? You need to pay them. Congress had a habit of not paying them. So they were already facing a mutinous army at the time, and they had to get the money from somewhere. So, plus, would you really want to hire somebody to go out and do all of these mean, nasty, horrible things to the British that aren't going to follow a code of conduct under the gentlemanly rules of war?
No,
That was the bond.
I think he's saying,
Is that
why
a-
didn't they give
Is that a real
more?
question? I would say yes.
Yeah.
Send them out there.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
They're gentlemanly.
Well, no, you have to be, because there is an etiquette. And remember, politeness and etiquette is something that is not taught anymore. Not in the
I think
general.
what he's saying is, why didn't they let more of the marks be used? Because they would have had more money.
They were for anybody who could afford to. Not everybody wanted to do it. But as far as it being, it was expensive, number one. So they didn't want to lower it because they wanted to make sure that they got as much money as possible. Some actually paid less. 2,800 is the average. Some paid more. It all depended on the size of the vessel and where they were. Yes, sir.
Any idea the cost of a schooner, 6 guns, cannonballs, and that to outfit a privateer?
Not at that time. I have no idea, but I know it was a lot
I was
of
gonna say, it's a lot,
money.
it's a lot more than probably than $2,800.
It is expensive to outfit that because these outfits had to do that themselves.
And as far as the uniforms, did you do that
There was no
yourself?
uniform.
What you're wearing?
I'm wearing clothing.
Oh.
Everybody's like, well, where's uniforms? There were no naval uniforms unless you were a naval officer at that time.
So this
The
is
the
now-
average sailor wore the same thing as any other civilian. I am dressed as a civilian gentleman. So everything I'm wearing now is the 18th century equivalent to what today is a three-piece suit. I am wearing breeches, I am wearing my dress stockings, I am wearing good shoes. The pants are a little shorter than we're used to, but trousers only started to gain in popularity towards the end of the 18th century. A waistcoat, or now what we know as a vest, and of course, nobody would be fully dressed without a coat. Yes, ma'am.
You're the captain, so with the other pilots, were they dressed like gentlemen, or how were they dressed, and how would a non-gentleman dress?
Well, I'm a businessman first and foremost, so I'm going to dress gentlemanly. Now, you also may notice I have a red cockade on my cap. Now, red at the time denoted loyalty to the crown. Notice that mine is maroon. So first thing somebody's gonna think, oh, well, it's just a bad dye job. And then they're gonna overlook the fact that, well, I am indeed a pirate. So, yeah, but no, nobody had uniforms until the general sailors didn't have uniforms until just before the Civil War.
So would you be, as a privateer, held in high regard by the general public?
We were looked at by, it all depended on who you were. Generally speaking, privateers were looked at like red-headed stepchildren. We were not well liked because we're in the cause for the money. And everybody saw that in the cause for money. And honestly, we're in it to make money. Why would we not be, doing something in order to profit for ourselves? Are we helping things out? Yes. Did I answer your question?
No, really,
Okay.
the crew wear.
What?
Would the crew wear the same
The
thing?
crew would wear something similar to this. It would be various states of this. There would be various states of undress, and depending on the weather. For example, I'm wearing wool right now. It's a nice cool day outside, so I would be perfectly comfortable in this. If I were, say, in South Carolina, as long as I am not exerting myself, I would be very comfortable. I would be warm, but I would still be comfortable because the wool wicks and pulls the sweat away from the body, and then as a breeze comes, acts kind of like an air conditioning. It's weird. Very weird. But no, the crew would wear, some of them had slops. My bosun, who's out there at the table, he's wearing slops or petticoat breeches. And they would basically have that. At the minimum, they would wear the shirt with the waistcoat. So most sailors did that. Most sailors would actually go with breeches or slops, maybe not stockings because they're going to get ripped up, but they would definitely be wearing shoes with no stockings. And I think that's where that aspect of barefoot came from. Oh, yes, sir.
Pirates, they were encouraged to be privateers?
I'm sorry?
Pirates, were they encouraged to be privateers?
No, they were not.
Really?
Really. Why would, if you've got somebody that's going to basically be an outlaw?
Well, they would fight the Spanish. They would have certain restrictions if they wanted to be considered loyal.
Yeah, then they would have to follow the same thing. But generally, there was about 40 years difference between the end of the golden age of piracy and the Revolution.
Oh, okay.
We did have pirates during the American Revolution, but they were all down south and doing the whole Caribbean side of things. Yeah, the West Indies. But they did still exist at that time. It's just it wasn't the heyday that we all come to know.
If you had the misfortune to be captured, do you have any rights at all?
None whatsoever. If I was captured, I could hope to be hung as a pirate, because otherwise I'm going to end up on the Jersey.
Prison ship?
The prison ship, the prison ship Jersey. And that honestly was a fate worse than death. I would rather be hung as a pirate.
So would I.
Anyone else?
Oh, there's one right there.
Okay.
You mentioned that you, as the owner of the privateer, is in competition with the Navy.
Yes.
And your letter of, I forget what it was.
Mark.
The letter of
instruction,
marque.
Letter of marque said a third of your crew had to be landsmen. A third
Yes.
of your company had to be landsmen. And that's because the Navy wanted a fair number of people who knew their way around a boat.
That's correct.
Because he pays
Did
better
they
than the
not take
Navy.
landsmen?
I'm sorry, what?
Did they take landsmen too, the Navy?
Yeah. Yeah, the Navy will take anyone that they can. They would prefer actually trained seamen. I mean, if you've got a military force, you want somebody that's going to know that job. You need somebody that's going to know that job. You really don't have a whole lot of time to train them. So you're going to be, that's why the Navy was so strict and so harsh on their sailors at that time. But we just paid better. So everybody's like, I want to be a privateer. Heck, there are reported cases of of crew, once they get into port, they skip town and they join a privateer. Like, they're trying to do that. Granted, they are considered deserters at that point.
The distance they traveled during their campaigns, where did they go from?
Oh, my God, there's no right
I mean, they
answer
go up to
that.
New England as far south as
They-
North Carolina, or
Oh
what?
my God, we had, there's cases of privateering going on up as far north as Nova Scotia.
Oh, my.
There was actually a case where a privateer broke ranks and went up there and committed ransom on a town. They actually captured 3 town officers, ransomed them for money, and they got it paid. I don't know what happened to them, but it happened. There was also a case of one guy who was a privateer. He had his commission pulled and then was given another one just later. He actually went after one of our allies. He actually captured a Spanish ship. And of course, they let the guy aboard, and it's the only reason that they got captured was, well, we're friends. And the whole time, the captain was telling them, no, you can't do this. This is not going to end well. And it created a diplomatic incident for them. So, yeah, there was a lot of cases of things like that going on. Probably lower level, but we had river pirates. The British actually had a name for them. They called them the refugees, and that was basically a tactic. They would swarm up against the ship saying, hey, our ship was just sank by Yankee privateers, help us. Or by British privateers, and then they would up and that was it.
Something we're familiar with right now.
Can I get into that?
Thank you.
Anyone
Thank you.
else? Okay, thank you very much.